Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Nell Pepper, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I am honored to introduce this virtual event with Farah Jasmine Griffin presenting her new book, Read Until You Understand: The Profound Wisdom of Black Life and Literature, in conversation with Henry Louis Gates, Jr. Thank you so much for joining us virtually tonight. Through virtual events like tonight's, Harvard Bookstore continues to bring authors and their work to our community. Every week, we will host events here on our Zoom account. Our fall events calendar is chock full of fascinating speakers, including Jelani Cobb, Derica Purnell in conversation with Imani Perry, and Mary Gateskill in conversation with Yi-Yoon Lee. Please check out the event schedule on our website at harvard.com/events. And while you're there, you can sign up for our email newsletters for more updates. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. If you have a question for our speakers at any time during the talk tonight, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will get through as many as time allows. We also have closed captioning enabled for this event. You may have to enable them yourself if you go down to the enable transcript button. Wherever it lives on your Zoom, you will be able to find the closed caption. And in the chat, I will be posting a link to purchase copies of Read Until You Understand on harvard.com, as well as a link to donate in support of the series and of our store. Your purchases and financial contributions make events like tonight's possible and help ensure the future of a landmark independent bookstore in Cambridge. We thank you so much for showing up and tuning in, not only in support of our authors, but also for the incredible staff of booksellers at Harvard Bookstore. We sincerely appreciate your support now and always. And finally, as you may have experienced in virtual gatherings, technical issues may arise. We of course hope that they do not, but if they do, we will do our best to resolve them quickly. We thank you so much for your understanding. And now I am so pleased to introduce our speakers. Farah Jasmine Griffin was the inaugural chair of the African American and African Diaspora Studies Department at Columbia University, where she is also William B. Ransford Professor of English and Comparative Literature. She has published widely on issues of race and gender, feminism, jazz, and cultural politics. She is the author of numerous books and the recipient of a 2021 Guggenheim Fellowship. Henry Louis Gates, Jr. is Alphonse Fletcher University Professor and founding director of the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research at Harvard University. An Emmy Award-winning filmmaker, literary scholar, journalist, cultural critic, and institution builder, Professor Gates has authored or co-authored 24 books and created 20 documentary films, including Finding Your Roots and Reconstruction, America After the Civil War. Tonight, they will be discussing Farah Jasmine Griffin's latest book, Read Until You Understand: The Profound Wisdom of Black Life and Literature. The book shares Professor Griffin's lifetime of exploring the ideas and poetics of African-American artistry. Exploring these works through such themes as justice, rage, self-determination, beauty, joy, and mercy, Griffin entwines memoir, history, and art while asking us to grapple with the continuing struggle for Black freedom. I'm delighted to turn things over to our speakers. The digital podium is yours, Professor Griffin, Professor Gates.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. We'd like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. Thank you, Farah Jasmine Griffin. I know how busy you are. Thank you for zooming up to your alma mater, Mother Harvard. You're on mute.
Thank you for doing this conversation with me. I'm so honored. You're a dream conversation partner about this.
Oh,
book.
That's so sweet. I love your book. Everybody, just go ahead and order this book right now. This book is wonderful. It's lyrical. It's lyrical. It's profound, and it's such an easy read. I was delighted because, well, it does a double dance that I want to talk about.
Okay.
Farah, this deeply personal book, we might say it represents the confluence of the two great rivers in your life, the personal and the scholarly. What inspired you to write this book at this point in your career?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think that I wanted to talk about the books that mattered to me and that I thought mattered to readers at this time in our history. But I also wanted to say that they don't just matter to me because I am an academic and I'm a scholar and I'm a literary scholar. And they don't just matter to me because of my formal education, but that they matter to me for deeply personal reasons. And that those personal reasons, I think, might also resonate with readers, both within the Academy, but even more importantly, outside of the Academy. So I felt like, at this stage, I could share some of those reasons why the books were important to me, in addition to the academic reasons.
Did you ever fantasize about being a novelist?
Oh, absolutely. I wanted to be a novelist my whole life. I wanted to be a creative writer. I think that I didn't think that I realized by college that I might write fiction, but that I would write nonfiction. But I don't think I really thought that I would be writing scholarly work until I was a junior in college or so. But before that point, I just wanted to be a creative writer. And I assumed that at some point I might write a novel. All through college, I wrote fiction.
Well, I got news for you. You are a creative writer.
The
And
world from you.
that next book's got to be a novel, because this is a hybrid. It is a memoir and literary criticism, ladies and gentlemen, but woven together with a fiction writer's eye and ear. More importantly, ear. It is. I used the word lyrical before, and it's a lyrical meditation on this moment in our people's culture. And by our people, I mean African Americans and also Americans, more broadly. And it is the profound rumination on the arc of the African American literary tradition, all at the same time. And I'll give you an example, ladies and gentlemen. The book opens with, and I quote, "This book starts with a girl and ends with grace." You see, that's very Morrisonian. Very Morrisonian. We'll talk about that later. So would you say a bit about the narrative arc suggested by that intriguing sentence? This book starts with a girl and ends with grace. Something about the girl, something about grace.
Sure. That was a line that just came to me very early on, and I knew that it was going to be the first line of the book. And I kept saying to myself, who's the girl? Am I the girl? Do I enter as the girl early on, or is it later? Or is Phyllis Wheatley the girl? Because I knew Wheatley was going to open, be an early chapter in the book. And so then, as I did that, I thought, girls will be woven throughout. So, it ends up, I am one of the girls that opens the book, my childhood. And then Wheatley is definitely a girl in the book. And then little Deanna Reynolds, who was the child who was in the car when Philando Castile was killed, is another little girl that emerges. So there are a number of girls. And then I knew that the book, so I knew that it would begin there. And I was just questioning, who's the girl? Is it Farah? Is it Phyllis Wheatley? Which girl is it going to be? And I knew that it was going to end with grace. That grace was a concept that I wanted to close the book. And so I sort of had that arc. And then the question was just, how do I get from the girl to grace? And that was the part of the fun and part of the mystery as things sort of unfolded. But I knew the beginning and I knew the end.
Wow. So you started with that sentence.
Yes.
Very much like Toni always said, she started with that.
Yeah.
That she started with that sentence. Well, it works narratively. And I want to talk about its particulars, but I don't want to spoil it for your readers. So I'm difficult. Let's deal with the subject that I know is difficult for you to talk about. And that's the cause and circumstances of your father, Emerson Maxwell Griffin's death in March of 1972. He died of cerebral hemorrhage and from police who wasted time, unnecessary time getting him to the hospital when they're deciding if he was, with their deep medical knowledge, if he was drunk or if he was this or he was that. It's a horrible story to read. And it made me sad, made me angry at the same time. And you were 9 years old.
Yes.
And that, it made my heart hurt for you, and for your father and your mom. So people zooming in tonight haven't read the book. Could you tell us a bit about your father and what it was like for you and your mom to keep going after such a devastating and unjust loss, and the influence that your father had on you in those first 9 years of life?
Well, my father was a very gifted man, intellectually gifted. He was educated, but also self-taught, a self-taught painter, self-taught musician, a lover of books, always had a book in his back pocket. He was a working class man. He worked as a welder, but an intellectual, and I think he was, as a young man, he was a bebopper. And the beboppers were intellectuals too. And he was a teacher, he was actually a teacher. So he had one of the first toys he bought me was a play blackboard. And
really?
Yeah, a blackboard with chalk. And he taught all the kids in our family. Like all of us, if we get together now, different generations will say we learned to read and write because of him. So he was a teacher, and in a different life, he might have been in the classroom. But I think, he was a complicated man, a man with his own demons. And I wanted to tell that story because, one, it's a story that has resonated with me my whole life. He was sick. The police were called to our home, and they waited and waited and waited before they took him to the hospital. But I wanted to tell it for a number of reasons, to also say to people that, these issues with officers in our communities that do not always act mercifully, it's not new, right? And that we have to change. And that the problems that we were seeing are problems there's a long history there. And it's a history that resonates in our literature as well. My mother and I, that experience, we experienced it together. We were finally in the police wagon with him together when he was taken to the hospital. I think that we were already deeply bonded, but it bonded us in ways that I don't think we could have imagined forever. So on the one hand, it made us kind of you and me against the world, But on the other hand, we were held up by an extraordinary community, neighborhood, neighbors, and family. And I don't think that either of us, my mother certainly, I don't think we would have made it in quite the same way that we did. That not only did we survive, but we thrived because people just enveloped us with an extraordinary sense of love and protection that was familial, but not only familial.
I mean, even to the point of providing a guard dog overnight. Yes. When your fence was down. The dog, exactly. Ladies and gentlemen, would appear at dusk and then disappear at dawn.
Exactly. We were like, is it magic?
I love that. That was great. But a follow-up about your father. I love this sentence. You write, intriguingly, he, quote, started out like Frederick Douglass and ended up like Malcolm X, unquote. Tell us about that evolution and what you meant by it. Because, Frederick Douglass was fiery and tough, and his last message to the race was agitate, agitate, agitate. Tell us about that evolution and how you learned to recognize it through your reading.
Yeah. So my father adored Frederick Douglass and adored Malcolm. And so my introduction to them as historic figures came through him. He loved both of them and, always talked about Frederick Douglass and read Frederick Douglass and look at this, there's Frederick Douglass. And he actually had encountered Malcolm as a young man. So it wasn't until I began to study them as, historic figures and study their writing that I started to see his thinking in them. And I think what I meant by that is I actually think that as a young man, he loved the fact that they were both autodidacts. And he loved their eloquence. I think that, like Douglass, he believed in the capacity of the United States to change, to as a kind of work in progress, that it might live up to its ideals, which is why he also really loved those founding documents. He loved the sound of the words. But by the time I knew him, he was much more like Malcolm, and did not have that belief in the capacity of the United States to change at all, and was a unrelenting critic of the nation, even as he was enamored of those people, especially Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence. So it wasn't until I began to read that I saw that trajectory, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. He loved Malcolm and he loved Frederick Douglass, but I think he started out more like Douglass, believing in the capacity for change, and ended up more like Malcolm.
You ask us to imagine how Frederick Douglass would look at America today. In particular, you wonder what he'd say about the situation of immigrants seeking asylum at our southern border. And you write, and I quote, "To view the United States through Douglass's lens is to issue an indictment of the country that would tolerate such practices," unquote. Tell us about that. And tell us, if Douglass came back, do you think, what would Douglass say when he'd say, "Farah, what has happened to our people?" And you would say, "Well, on the one hand, we have the Department of African American Studies at Columbia." He'd say, "Wow, is there a revolution?" He'd say, on the other hand, the child poverty rate is still way too high. What would you say? What would Douglass say?
So yeah, when I wrote that line, I was thinking in particular about some people who claim Douglass as a Republican and as a conservative, and I think it's out of context. It's not in the context of what the Republican Party was to Douglass, and that even he also became critical of the parties that he was committed to later on. And so I wanted to say that the Douglass that you're citing is not, you're citing him in the wrong way. But let's think about it. When I wrote that line, I was thinking about migrants from Central America. And today, it would be fascinating to know what Douglass meant, because we're looking at the ways that migrants from Haiti were treated. And Douglass having had that relationship with Haiti, right?
Right.
So, it would be especially fascinating. I wish I could, him asking me questions, I'd say, what do you think of this? And I certainly could not have predicted that when I wrote the book. So I think that he would be, probably thrilled at the advances that we have made. I mean, there's one of those last speeches where he talks about like the advances that Black people made so shortly out of slavery. But I think quite disappointed in our nation and its responses at times to the struggles and needs of Black people. Disappointed, disillusioned. But I think that he would have continued to say that it's something for which we must fight. We must fight.
So you don't think that he would say, "I made a mistake when my daughter was trying to persuade me to emigrate to Haiti. Then the war broke out. He bought tickets, I think." We have to check David. You have to fact check me on that.
Right.
Yeah, check David Blight. But they were going to go to Haiti, and he'd announced that. Then there was Fort Sumter. They were going to go to visit. He was just sussing it out. And remember, there was Dred Scott, which is the lowest point. Right. Other than slavery, for the Supreme Court to say the founding fathers never even had you people in mind. I mean, you were not citizens. You weren't citizens. You were never going to be citizens. I've often thought, imagine if you read about that, that the court's decision just erasing you as a citizen. Yeah. And so he was at low ebb, and then the war breaks out, and he goes, "No, I'm not going to Haiti." So you don't think he'd come back and say, "I should have gone to Haiti"?
I don't think he would have have said that. He might say I should go somewhere now,
Yeah.
but I don't think he would have said that. I think that when the war broke out, there was a sense of, promise and possibility, and that it would be something that we'd have to fight for and struggle for. But I think it would have been very hard for him to kind of abandon the fight here, and abandon those of us who remained here. I think that would have been very difficult.
But Farah, how long? How long do we have to fight? I had a marvelous conversation just like this with Randy Kennedy for the Harvard Bookstore just a couple of days ago. And I realized when he was talking that the American people broke his heart. Yeah. The American people broke Randy Kennedy's heart. And I asked him that, and he said, yes, when they voted for Donald Trump. And then when 74 million Americans voted for Donald Trump again. It's one thing to make a mistake. Everybody makes a mistake. I make a mistake, you make it. But to make a mistake twice, 74 million people voted for Donald Trump the second time. So are you, I know you're an optimistic person. I know you're a dear friend of mine, and you love flowers and you love sunshine. But how long do our people have to organize and protest? I mean, for goodness sake, Douglas died in 1895, and we still are confronting issues that plagued the African-American community when Frederick Douglass was alive.
Well, not only are we still confronting those issues, and I don't know that I'm an optimist, I'm hopeful, but I think that, I think about someone like Du Bois. Du Bois was damn near 100 years old, right? Excuse my language. And then he's like, you know what? This place is not going to change.
Right.
I mean, it took him that long, but he was like, it's not, I'm out. It's not going to change. And so, and certainly Malcolm, never thought that it was going to change. And one of my fears is, I look at what just happened with the court with Roe v. Wade.
Oh, yeah. And
I'm like, I wouldn't put it beyond some of those people on the court to go back to Dred Scott. Go back and say, they didn't have you in mind.
Right.
I wouldn't put it beyond them to say that or to do that. And if they could get away with it, I wouldn't put it beyond them. I think there are people in the country who probably still believe that. I do think, so how long do we have to fight? One, I think that's a good question. I also say, where do we go?
Right.
Where do we go? And where do we go that we don't fight, that we don't struggle? And I think that, maybe it's just a matter of a different kind of struggle that we're willing to engage in or put up with. But so I think that's always my question. My question is, if not here, okay, then where?
Right.
Then where?
I mean, this is the where. The last enslaved Africans came here legally in 1807. Remember, after 1808, the slave trade is banned. We've been here a long time. And, there's no there. You've traveled in Africa. I've traveled in Africa. We're not going anywhere. We have to stake a claim on the American dream. We have to stake a claim on the Declaration. We have to stake our claim on the Constitution. We have to stay and fight. It is an unfortunate aspect of being a person of color, and in general, more specifically, an African American in this country. But we just have to do it. And we have to celebrate all the progress we've made. And we have to fight to protect those who have been, for whom progress has been closed off.
Yeah.
That is the mixed blessing of being an African American in this country.
I think so. And if someone comes up with a place that, that would be a better place for us, that would really welcome us, I'd look at it.
Let's talk about Toni Morrison. Yeah. Some of the most arresting passages in the book flow through your writing about Toni Morrison, with whom you were very close. She was a mighty tree in your life. Yeah. And one that I circled is in your meditation on the bluest sky, when you write that the novel is calling out to us with questions that must be answered. This is what you said. How do we treat each other? Do we mirror and echo the values of the larger society, or do we live by an alternative set of values, which in a way is what we were talking about? unquote. Now, I just finished filming a new documentary series. We call it Through the Grapevine, Making Black America. And it's on the world that Black people created behind the veil, behind the color line, whether it was the Divine Nine or the National Medical Association, or taking bid whist from rich white people and making it the national Black pastime, or the Prince Hall Masons or Black Twitter. From the Prince Hall Masons and the Black Church to Black Twitter and Black Lives Matter. So how has Black Americans' exclusion from America shaped the values within our community? And what do you think we owe to one another as citizens of this nation within a nation, as Martin Delany first put it?
So I think, it's funny, my husband writes about the church, and he writes about how, and I think that's one of those institutions, right, where people were treated with dignity and carried themselves with dignity, how they got dressed in church, and how you called someone sister so-and-so or brother so-and-so. And you gave people a sense of value. People had a sense of value, the way that they treated their children, right? They were smart, and yes, baby, you're beautiful. And so all of those things are, and we have many of those, kinds of practices that were really established to go up against the way we were treated outside of our own communities. A sense of dignity, a sense of pride, a sense of self-worth. And I think that, many of those institutions that you talk about, a place, as I say, to be somebody, right? That's what it's a place where you could be somebody. And where you could also, I think about our sororities and our fraternities, you learn how to create organizations, and you learn how to become president and parliamentarian, and all of those sorts of things were very important for those organizations. I think that Morrison, in that novel, both shows us instances of us caring for each other in that way, and she shows us what can happen when we don't. And so it's not romanticizing it. It's like a lot of times we don't do the right thing toward each other, right? A lot of times we don't we don't take care of each other. There isn't the kind of ethic of care that is required. It is an ideal toward which we strive. And sometimes we fall short. And when we fall short, the most vulnerable people are victimized as a result of our falling short, as a consequence of our falling short. But yes, I think that the ethics that emerge from those institutions and organizations are about our capacity for genius and brilliance and beauty and dignity, and what we need to continue to live in this place.
Toni Morrison is your touchstone. I mean, you include so many writers here whose writings I love, from Phyllis Wheatley and Frederick Douglass to Jesmyn Ward and Ta-Nehisi Coates, but you always return to the Queen, to Queen Tonifa. Toni Morrison, ladies and gentlemen, looms large in this marvelous book. So what floats your boat about Toni Morrison? What's been her influence on your understanding of history, literature, and why do you own Toni? I mean, you own these books. When you write about them, Farah, you're inside of the logic of her sentences. And it is a marvelous thing to behold as a fellow lover of literature, a lover of Morrison's writing, and as a fellow literary critic. For me, it's Baldwin. I mean, I love, I memorized Baldwin. When I was 15, I started writing his sentences out in my commonplace book. Each one of us helplessly and forever contains the other. Male and female, female and male, white and black, black and white. We are a part of each other. Many of my countrymen find this fact exceedingly inconvenient and something else. And so very often do I. But none of us can do anything at all about it. James Baldwin.
I love it. I love it.
So tell me about you and Toni Morrison. Where did this love affair start, and what has sustained it?
Yeah, so I just love what you just did, because my hope is that particularly young readers, find a writer who is to them what those writers became to us, right? It's our lives are richer because of it. So I
the older my father's generation and my mother's generation, they had to memorize.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And memorization then was thought to be bad. Memorization of literature is a good thing.
I think it's a good thing too. You know, I think it's a very good thing. So I think with me, with Morrison, it was, she, you know, I read her when I was a teenager, and I was just completely seduced by the language, even if I didn't understand everything.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, wow, like, you know. Then when I went to this little private school for 3 years, and I learned the canon,
Mm-hmm.
they weren't teaching us Black writers, and I was like, she could actually stand her own. You know, she could stand her own with this. And what I think I really fell in love with was that she clearly had read all that stuff and taken it in and was engaging it and arguing with it and shaping it. And yet she was also showing the value and beauty in the way we think and the way Black people talk and the way Black communities come up with their own system of values and worldviews. So I just was learning from her every day. And I would ask myself when I read her, what do I need to know? What do I need to know to really understand what she's trying to tell me? Like, what do I need to learn? And then sometimes I'd argue with her, you know, and when I was a staunch feminist, I'd argue with her, and I was like, no, it's Alice Walker is the one, you know, it's Alice Walker. And then I'd get pulled back into Morrison. And I think that she just asked big questions. Her fiction asked big questions. And it felt like literature that was as important as Homer, you know. And so and I kept going back to her. I kept just, she is, you know, what Baldwin was for you, that is what she is for me, that is what Ellison is for others, you know. And so my hope is I'm sharing my passion for her. I'm sharing a way to read her, but who floats your boat, you know, like, question, like, who does that for you?
Yeah, well, for me, it's James Baldwin, of course, and Wole Soyinka. You know, Soyinka was my professor.
Right.
He and Anthony Opie are my kids' godfathers. You know, we were all there at Cambridge at the same time. They're the only reasons I became an academic. I was going to, you know, graduate from Yale. I was coming back, going to Oxford and Cambridge, and just to have that experience, and then come back to go to med school. Or, well, I actually took supervisions in inorganic chemistry, biology, and physics while I was at Cambridge learning about English. That's the truth. And those two said to me, you know, forget all that. Doctor, you're going to be a doctor of literature, you know, a doctor of philosophy. And I love Soyinka, but I love Toni's mentors. I love Faulkner.
Yes.
You know, and I tell my students, okay, Richard Wright and Zora Neale Hurston and Toni, right? No, Toni wrote her master's thesis not about Richard Wright and Zora Neale Hurston, but about Virginia Woolf and William Faulkner. Ellison. I love Ralph Ellison. I love Ellison's essays.
Yes.
But I love Emerson's essays. You know, don't get me started about who I like.
I know exactly what you mean. I mean, you know, there are lines in that I went back and read Virginia Woolf because Toni read Virginia Woolf.
Yeah.
I love Edith Wharton.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. And Marquez, of course, you know. Yes. And when you read Faulkner, Marquez, Toni, you read Toni, Marquez, Faulkner, you know, you read backwards in terms of literary history.
Right.
That you understand Faulkner better to see how they both have riffed on
Absolutely.
it. I just got my chat. Our host said, okay, one more question. What are you talking about? Farah and I are going to talk all night. Exactly. We got 3 more hours of questions here. All right, let me ask you. Oh, well, one quick thing. I'm going to ask 1.5 questions, and then I'll yield.
1.5.
What is your favorite Toni Morrison novel?
I can't even say. I mean, I you know, sometimes I say Beloved, sometimes I say Song of Solomon. Then she comes out with a Mercy. You know. Yeah. So it's almost impossible for me to say what is my favorite Morrison novel. I have favorite parts of every novel. Every novel. I love Sula. I think Sula is almost perfect. So I can't do that. That would be like saying pick your favorite child.
Well, my favorite Toni Morrison novel is Jazz.
Wow.
I think Jazz is a masterpiece of storytelling. Yeah. She, you know, there's those I don't know if they still do them, but there was a Franklin imprint that when they would take a first edition and put a leather cover on.
Yes.
And she asked me to write the introduction to jazz. And I was so amazed for the Franklin limited edition.
Yes.
And she never asked me to do anything like that, you know? And when I read it, I knew why. Because it is the trope of the talking book.
It's what it is, right?
It is the talking book. She takes the trope of the talking book and she embeds it. She literalizes it. She puts it at the heart of that book. Yep. And when you read the last paragraph, I mean, it just knocks me out. I mean, I love that book.
I mean, from the opening, that.
Yeah. No, I can't do it, you know. No, it is, she went back to the tradition that starts with the trope of the talking book and those first 5 of the, you know, or first 7 slave narratives, 5 of them use the trope of the talking book, and she brings it back and puts it down. Hurston does the talking book too, but Toni did it consciously.
Toni really did it. And it, you know, it shocks us that last, like you said, that very end, like, look where your hands are now.
Look where your hands are now. You go, oh man, you know, it's like love. I heard her say one time that the people she grew up with hated her novels because people do weird things to each other.
Yes.
You know, and they're complicated, man. You
Very
know, Milkman, whoa.
Very complicated.
They're like X-rated. You have to give students trigger warning. You go, if you're going to take this course on Mars, all kind of things are going to happen here that bother you.
Exactly. You're going to be uncomfortable.
You're going to be uncomfortable. A final question. A very important thing that you said, among one of the most important of the very many important things you said, and I found it, I'm going to use it to teach with, and here it is. You write, quote, "This seems to be a major dilemma of the Black artist and intellectual in the West. In order to be heard by those who oppress you, you must first accept the false premise that justifies your oppression. I'm going to read that again. In order to be heard by those who oppress you, you must first accept the false premise that justifies your oppression," unquote. What did you mean by that? And more broadly, what do you see as the dilemma that Black artists and intellectuals face in the West, in the United States? And how has it changed over time, if it has changed over time?
I do think it's changed. I think that, but there, you know, I was thinking especially about Wheatley, but not only Wheatley,
right.
But where she, you know, has to say, "'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land," you know.
Right. I love your reading of that, because I wrote, as you know, that's the most reviled poem in the African-American tradition.
Yes, as you can see with my Post-its right here. It is, and I think that it's, you know, and then as you know, the poem takes a turn, right? So she says, "I'm grateful for the, you know, slavery because I was saved,"
right?
You know. And then she says, now, and then she gets authoritative, and she says, "Remember Christians," right? You know, and she calls them out. That
Negroes black as Cain,
right? May be refined and join the angelic train, right?
Angelic train, right?
Exactly. So right there, you have it. So she, in order for them to listen to her, you know, she says, "Yes, Africa's pagan. Yes, I was pagan. And yes, Christianity was brought to me because of slavery. Yes, I agree with that. And now I can tell you what you really need to hear." And even, you know, you in this book, you know, take us there and show places where she's not talking that way about Africa, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right? It's clearly a decision that this young girl has made. And I think throughout, we see that over and over again. We see it in Equiano. I mean, you know, where you have to say, "You all are the greatest. And what you did by exposing me to Christianity and democracy or whatever, that was the best thing that could happen to me. And now I can tell you what's wrong with you."
Right. And I can tell you what's wrong with you in your sinful, evil self.
Exactly.
That's true.
Equiano's like, "And you're dirty too." But,
yeah.
But I think that things have changed, and I think that they've changed because of what writers have continued to do. And so by the time we get to Baldwin, your beloved Baldwin, and he says, you know, the price of the ticket has been paid. You know, you don't have to prove your humanity anymore. Like, you don't have to prove that. You don't have to prove that you're human. It's already been paid.
Right.
And so I think each generation has moved us farther and farther away from having to make those kinds of compromises. Not to say that people don't still make them.
You're right.
But I don't
No,
think we have to make them.
no, and the system collectively and you know, and individuals that we encounter in our professional life sometimes still attempt to put us in those situations.
Oh,
when,
absolutely.
you know, like, how did you get in here on a football scholarship? You
Yes.
know, what sport did you play to get into Columbia?
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
I have students who come and ask me, how do you deal with those kind of racist insults? And you tell them, you know, this is what to do, how to stand up to that, how to transcend that. But it's painful that people have to experience these kind of slights. And as you say, they have a long history.
Very long history. And
registered in our literature. And it's fascinating to me. I always ask when I'm interviewing someone for Finding Your Roots, I say, I explain to them that in all Black autobiography, there is a scene of instruction when the person learns that they're Black. And it's true. I mean, Frederick Douglass, Du Bois, when the visiting girl won't take his calling card, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
Frederick Douglass, you know, he's 5 years old or something when he realizes that he's a slave. You either learn that you're a slave, you're not born a slave. You learn that you're an enslaved person by some painful experience. You learn that you were Black by some painful experience. What happened to you? When did you learn that you were Black?
Well, you know, I think it's interesting. Like my daddy was telling me I was Black from the beginning, right? All the way. I mean, I think what I learned was that wasn't necessarily always seen as a good thing. So my father had told me that I was Black, and he told me that I was beautiful, and he would say, you know, he wanted to be as dark as me, and he would say all those things. And then I went out and I played with my little friends, and they teased me about being dark skinned. And I came home and I was like, something's wrong. Like they see this as a bad thing, and Daddy told me this was a great thing. And so it was in that moment that I realized, these were Black people who don't like the Blacker person. What is that all about? That was a shock to me. It really
had to be painful.
It was painful. And my father had this, you know, explanation, you know, about white supremacy, but I was 5. It didn't make any sense to me.
No.
So I think that it was probably when I was about 5 years old that it hit me that, there are people in the world for whom this is a bad thing. And I had been probably overly indulged as a way of protecting me for when that moment happened, that I was shocked because I'd been taught that it was a beautiful thing.
It reminds me of reminds me of Maud Martha.
Yes.
Too, you know, that Maud was, but it is the scene of instruction is always that our Blackness is a lack, an absence. It's disturbing. We're punished for it.
Yes.
It is a deprivation, and then the protagonist picks up from that fall and rebuilds a life. You know, and transcends it. Yeah.
Right. There's Janie looking at that photograph, saying, "Who's that colored child?" Right?
Yeah, it's like.
Right.
And having no name. What's your name? Alphabet, which is all names and no name, right?
Exactly.
Oh my God. Can we teach a course together?
I know, I would love to.
On Morrison. I would love, or we could do Baldwin and Morrison.
That would be wonderful.
All right, we got to ask.
Okay.
They're about to.
The Apollo hook coming to get us.
Sorry.
Yeah, I know, man. Who's that?
I hate being that guy. I could listen to you talk about Toni Morrison all day and all night. Thank you.
I forgot that we were in public. I thought we were just sitting there having a bottle of wine. Okay. All right, let's open it up for questions.
We do have some questions from the audience and folks.
But since they're not interesting, I can ask the rest of my questions. I'm sorry.
No, feel free to pop in. Honestly, I mean, we can. Yeah, this is. It's a conversation. Let's keep it as a conversation.
Now let's see what Farah's readers. Don't forget, this is about you all buying this book.
I reposted the link in the chat. So yes, please buy the book. First question we have, what contemporary artists, writers or musicians or whoever do you see as joining in or expanding the Black literary tradition after Morrison?
Sure. So I write about Ta-Nehisi Coates. I write about Jessamine Ward.
Mhm.
I think Kiese Lehman. I think this new book by Honoré Fanon Jeffers. Oh my God. I didn't see that one coming. And I've known her, I know her as a poet.
Yeah,
Written
yeah.
brilliantly about Phyllis Wheatley.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think there are a number, many contemporary writers who fall within this tradition, extended. Colson Whitehead, who also has a new novel out right now. Many of them, but the two that I write about are Coates and Ward.
Mhm. Um, we have next question. Do you have any particular works that you return to on difficult days? What Black writings comfort you, sustain you, give you hope when you need it?
Yeah, Morrison, of course, but also Baldwin. And it's interesting, I return to Baldwin's essays, but I return to Sonny's Blues
Oh,
over and over and over again. I love Sonny's Blues. And I think because those books, they don't give you a false sense of security. You know, they talk about the painful, the difficult, the ugly, and then they talk about the beauty that we create in spite of it, and the beauty and the ways that we create beauty that incorporates it. Um, and there's a vulnerability to the characters in that. So I return often to Sonny's Blues. I return to Morrison. I love Paradise. I love the sermons in Paradise. I love the yeah. So I return quite often to that. I read a lot of poetry, a lot of Nikki Finney, quite a bit of Nikki Finney. That the poets do it for me. Absolutely. Hughes comforts me. I write about in the book. I write about his poem "Dear Lovely Death," which I go to whenever I lose someone close to me. It really helps me and sustains me.
Sonny's Blues, it's not read enough, but it is the best. It's the best piece of fiction that Baldwin wrote, and one of the greatest short stories, I think. When I make a short list of short stories, Sonny's Blues and Solo Song for Doc by James Allen McPherson. And people don't teach McPherson very much now, but Solo Song for Doc is brilliant, a brilliant short story structurally too. Anyway,
I wish we did more short stories. And if you haven't read Sonny's Blues, read it tonight. You can find it.
No, absolutely. And I love Elizabeth Alexander's poetry, our dear friend.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
She's so smart. She's so lyrical and so intelligent at the same time. She's an extraordinary poet.
I love her poetry and I love her essays. I love her.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, her essays are they're like models of the form. Absolutely.
Yeah, and she owns Gwendolyn Brooks.
Yes. Yes, we want to hear more from her on Gwendolyn.
We want to hear. This is an ad. Elizabeth, write about Gwendolyn Brooks.
Yes, we're working on that.
And we have a question from Maria Carmona. Why did you know you wanted to end on the idea of grace? I love the idea and have my own musings, but would like to hear your thoughts on this.
When I first learned about the concept of grace, that it was kind of unmerited reward, I fell in love with it. And I felt that my own life was so characterized by moments of grace. And then I just looked for it, so that I could celebrate it. So there's this whole thing about, the kind of a flower, the beauty of a flower being a moment of grace, because it's just there. The beauty of it is just there. Or people being conduits of grace to each other. And so I knew that a lot of this book would be painful, personally and politically. A lot of it would be difficult. And I wanted to leave people with a kind of unexpected gift that, even in the worst of times, there's this possibility of something that you just don't expect that's beautiful. And it reminds me of the spiritual, over my head, I hear music in the air, there must be a God somewhere. And I think that's written by an enslaved person. That's their concept, that this is horrible. but I hear this music in the air. You know, the birds are singing. So there must be something somewhere. To me, that's grace.
Oh, that's so beautiful. That,
Yeah.
you know, the poetry of the spirituals, you know, Du Bois's sorrow songs. When I think about, and you know, I made the series on the Black church, and our next series we're going to shoot is the history of gospel music.
Wow.
And I really want to get into those, as James Weldon Johnson, but those Black and unknown bards. I mean, that act of poesis was astonishing. You know, Ezekiel 37, Ezekiel saw the wheel way up in the middle of the air. Ezekiel saw the wheel. These are like uneducated Black people came in from picking cotton, and somebody, it was like a Shakespeare among them. I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing.
The anonymous genius. One of the last times I heard Maya Angelou speak, she talked about, you know, that part where, you know, God gives Noah the rainbow sign, right? And Baldwin, and she says in the spiritual, it's not that the rainbow comes after the cloud, after the storm. She's like, in the spiritual, the rainbow is already in the cloud, right? It's there. So the promise is there. And I just thought, oh, that's like, you know, what philosopher has come up with something like that? What theologian?
No, it's true. But I worry about that aspect of our people's culture being lost.
Yeah.
I worry about that. We're the keepers of the tradition, and we got to keep pounding away. You know, you got to read the first volume of the Norton Anthology. Okay, next question.
Next question. We have an anonymous attendee asking, do you see a difference in influence on Black literature between Toni Morrison, the editor, and Toni Morrison, the writer?
Wow, what a great question. Yes, I mean, I think Toni Morrison, the editor, made a very conscious intervention to put some voices out there. Imani Perry, my beloved Imani Perry, wrote a piece on Gail Jones in the New York Times magazine coming out, and she found a letter from Gail Jones to a friend talking about, she's like, Gail Jones says in the letter, I have an editor and she wants to see all my work and she thinks that there are these stories in it. And she said, and I'm so used to receiving the rejection letters that I even tried to make her letter into a rejection letter. And I think like, okay, like without Toni, we wouldn't have Gail Jones.
Right.
And you think about all the things, either that people had written stuff and sent it to her, and or Michael Harper is the one who sent Toni Gail Jones's work. So there, big box of work. So, or she's commissioning work, like she's going to Angela Davis and saying, you need to write an autobiography. You know, I think of those as very active interventions into trying to put a set of voices out there. And then Morrison as a novelist is shaping us and shaping the tradition for those of us who read her, writers who are writing in response to her. Ayanna Mathis, you know, calls her kind of anchor and lighthouse, right? She's both of those things for so many writers and critics, I think.
And she even edited Muhammad Ali's autobiography.
Yes.
She did. She played, you talk about an institution builder. She was an institution builder. She helped to shape and build the institution of African-American literature and institutionalized it by being able to publish it, by put it in editions that were affordable. And then she started teaching at Yale. When I was a baby professor, she taught Black women and their fiction. And then, you know, what I'm trying to say is that she was a pivotal person in the history of African-American literature, both as a creator and as a professor and as a publisher.
Right.
All at the same time. Yeah.
All those things, right.
Yeah.
I'm just sorry, the letter that you quoting, the Gail Jones's letter, and I'm just like, imagine if she'd misinterpreted that and then we never got Corregidora.
Exactly.
Exactly. Okay. And I think this should probably, well, we have two closing questions. I think we have time for the last two questions. So Eddie Bruce Jones asks, Professor Griffin, thank you for this conversation. As a literary critic, have you found it challenging to find the space for such a hybrid genre book as this? I suppose the memoir and the criticism.
Yeah. If I were younger, yes. You know, earlier in my career, I think that I would have. But at this stage, I just felt like it was the book that I had to write, and it was the book that was inside of me and wanted to come out, and so I didn't find it challenging, and luckily I wasn't up for tenure. Like that, you know, I just I at a different stage in my life and career, maybe I would have, but not this time, no.
And the last question, and I would love to hear both of your thoughts on this. What would you recommend to someone looking, that lucky person who hasn't read Toni Morrison yet and gets to read her for the first time? What would you recommend that they read first?
Oh my goodness. If they haven't read her, they've never read her, I would recommend, I guess Skip would say jazz. I would say Bluest Eye or Sula. I would say start at the beginning. That's what I would say. Start with those because they're short. You know, they're intense. You get a taste for the Morrison to come. So I would actually recommend one of those two early ones.
I would agree. Oh, I might, depending on the student.
Yeah.
I might say Song of Solomon.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, Barack Obama said that's his favorite Morrison, and I can see why. It's kind of like a guy's story, you know, in a way.
It's also, it's epic.
Yeah, it's epic.
Yeah.
And, you know, does he fly in the end? Does he not? You know, it's a kind of, it's in a certain vein within the African-American storytelling tradition. But the Bluest Eye is where, I would not tell them to start with jazz. If they start with jazz, they'd never get to anything else. You got to sneak up on jazz.
You got to sneak up on it. I agree. Same way with Paradise. You got to sneak up on Paradise. But I think Song of Solomon also because it has that, you know, you started off with my students, they started off and I'm like, you don't understand. I know the first page doesn't make sense. It's crazy. And then I tell them when we finish, I say, now go back and read the first page again.
Yeah.
Like you are a different person by the end of the novel. You're smarter.
Yeah.
Now you can read it. You can understand the first page. It's a joy to read in that way.
It's true. You know, when she gave a very distinguished lecture series here at Harvard, I was asked to do one of the introductions, and so I just listened to her. You know, I downloaded all of the books that she's narrated, that, you know, her audio books in her own voice. And it is a whole, I encourage my students to, when you read her, it's how I first read Shakespeare when I was about 15 or 16. I got the albums, you know, out of the library, and, you know, you'd hear Richard Burton reading Macbeth or what, you know, whatever it was. And Laurence Olivier doing Hamlet. Yeah. And it helps you to understand, particularly when you're 15 years old, right? But even with Morrison, at my age, it helps me to understand what she's doing and the magic. And she has a way of using the Greek chorus. You know, she uses the community voice, the communal voices in Greek chorus. She structures her novels very much like plays, like communal tragedies. And it's marvelous to hear her do that dance with her voice on her own prose. She's a genius.
She loved, I mean, she said the only person she liked reading her work was, I think Ruby Dee read one of the early ones. And then she read all the other ones herself. Yeah.
Yeah. Farah, thank you so much. As you said, this is not a book you write when you're coming up for tenure. Get tenure, and then, but this is a book by a mature, reflective scholar meditating on herself as a human being, a person experiencing the human condition through the literature that she's taught for the last couple decades, as well as the literature that she's making in this marvelously lyrical memoir. Congratulations on a great triumph.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks so much to both of you. Yes. Brava.
All right, now I'm going to eat dinner. I'm going to open that bottle of wine, raise a glass to Farah Jasmine Griffin. I hope you all buy this book. It is a marvelous book and a great contribution to American letters. Congratulations, dear friend.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All
Thanks so
right.
much to both of you. Thank you. So this was beautiful. Thanks to all of you for joining us. I posted the link again in the chat. Please purchase copies of this remarkable book, and stay safe, everyone. Happy reading. Have a lovely evening. Thank you again, professors. This was a light in my life. Thank you. Bye.